Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Injury Law Pod. I am your host, Eric Bartlett, 29-year personal injury lawyer, and this is the podcast where we talk about all things personal injury law related. And up today, we have a pretty serious situation that occurred here in the Kansas City area. A Jackson County deputy was struck by a vehicle while he was investigating a crash. And this is just one example of how routine duties by our police, fire, paramedics, any type of first responders become life-threatening situations. And this deputy was seriously hurt. He was taken to the hospital with critical injuries, but as of the latest reports, he is in stable condition. And this kind of injury, it isn't rare. It's just one of dozens of ways first responders get hurt on the job every day. And here at North End Injury Law, we have represented first responders in just about every situation they can be hurt in. We've represented police officers, we've represented firefighters, we've represented paramedics. And so we've seen it, we've handled them. And today we're going to talk about all the various dangers that first responders are faced with. And when that happens, when they get hurt, what it looks like legally for them in order to recover both financially and medically. And so we're going to just break it all down and go through again, generally talking about Missouri law. And today we're going to just start with an overview of what are all the dangers faced by first responders. First, you have roadway dangers. Every day, police officers are doing traffic stops, they're doing crash investigations, and when they're out on the highways or the streets and there's traffic issues already because there was a crash, it enhances the risk to them. Or if they're on a traffic stop, again, they're exposed on the side of a roadway. And a lot of times those police officers end up getting hit by another vehicle when they're performing those duties. Now, obviously, another area where police officers face potential injury is in physical confrontations. Again, they're making arrest of people, they're handling domestic calls, they may be handling crowd control situations. And all of these scenarios present opportunities, if you will, for the police officers to get injured. Now, there's also the more mundane situations where when they're out performing their duties, again, this could be police officers, firefighters, paramedics, they might encounter icy or wet pavement. Paramedics might be carrying patients and might get hurt in that way. Again, police officers may be wrestling suspects or something like that. It could be a matter of, for example, we had a police officer who was going down some stairs during his duties, and there was a misstep and he injured his knee. I think he was in a hurry because of the nature of the call he was on. So again, you just never know where they're going to find a potential hazard that is going to cause injury. And then also, especially with firefighters, they're exposed to smoke, potentially dangerous chemicals, things like that. There's a lot of cancer that runs through the firefighter community because they're exposed to this stuff, their equipment, the clothing that they're wearing, those types of things, they absorb smoke and chemicals and things like that. And if those things aren't regularly cleaned and they don't get out of them soon enough, then those all can lead to a long-term exposure situation, and again can cause problems down the road. There's also bloodborne pathogens that, again, whether you're potentially a firefighter that also acts as an EMT, or you are an EMT, you face potential exposure to blood-borne pathogens at any given time while you're on duty. And then finally, there's psychological injuries. There's a lot of traumatic events that these people are exposed to routinely through their work. So whether maybe it's an officer involved shooting, maybe it's a paramedic that witnesses somebody pass away, or a firefighter that sees somebody badly burned or something of that nature, all of those can cause profound psychological trauma to the person that's working in those scenarios trying to help people. And again, we've had those. We've had officers where they've been involved in a shooting and have had PTSD as a result. These are very serious situations, very traumatic. And at the end of the day, these first responders, they're human beings. And sometimes we just assume that they're equipped to handle these scenarios that they're going to come across, but not always. And again, they're humans and they're facing very serious situations. And so all of these things can lead to some kind of an injury. And so when that happens, it just depends on the situation, but workers' compensation can be involved. And also, the first responder may have a claim against somebody else. So let's take it from there and break it down a little bit further. So, looking at these various types of ways that first responders can be injured, more than likely, all of the scenarios I just described are going to be covered by workers' compensation. If the person working was injured on the job, or again, injury in the sense of some emotional trauma, then under Missouri law, they're going to be covered by the workers' compensation system. And that means they're going to get their medical care covered. If they have to be off work for some amount of time, they'll be entitled to weekly benefits. And then finally, at the end of all of it, they'll be entitled to a disability settlement in the work comp system. And depending on the nature of the injury and what all that looks like, of course, it's going to reflect in what benefits exactly they get. And with first responders, a lot of times there are special laws, rules, however you want to look at it, in place that handle some of their types of injuries in a particular way. And so if you're a first responder and you have some kind of an injury on the job, you really have to know how the law affects you, what exactly you're entitled to, and what it looks like at the end of it when it comes time to talk about a disability settlement. Because again, there are special circumstances, again, depending on who you are and how an injury occurred and things like that. Workers' comp is the safety net, but it's not the whole story, because sometimes, again, depending on the situation, the first responder may actually have a claim against somebody else. If somebody else caused the injury, then they very well may have a claim against that negligent party for causing the injury. So let's take a look at that. Common scenarios for this are that, say, a negligent driver hits a police officer, there's going to be a third party auto claim that comes out of that. So they'll have their work comp claim, but then they may also have a secondary claim, again, against the at fault driver, and they can actually recover benefits under both separate claims. And so that's really important, because a lot of people don't understand that they may have two avenues to recovery. And again, while they have the work comp to cover their medical, maybe cover that immediate time while they're off work, things like that, they can go after the negligent party down the road and make a claim for their pain and suffering and all the things that work comp doesn't factor in. Now, another one, dangerous property, right? Say that a first responder is out on a call and there's something dangerous about the situation, the property, and it causes them injury, they may have a premises liability claim against the property owner. And we've seen that where, for example, paramedics, they're responding to somebody that fell on an icy sidewalk or property of some sort. And in their duty of trying to help that person that was injured, they sustain injury because of the nature of the condition of the property. So now they're going to be covered by work comp, but they're also going to have that claim, that potential claim against the property owner. Faulty equipment, right? So they may have some products liability claim against a manufacturer of some equipment they've been provided to do their job. And when it fails, it doesn't perform as it was reasonably expected to do so, they may have some larger claim against the manufacturer for a product's liability situation. And finally, in a criminal situation, again, they could have a potential civil claim against the person that injures them while they're involved in, say, apprehending a person or something like that. Again, they could potentially seek some kind of restitution against that person. Those are going to be really difficult claims because, generally speaking, the people that they're handling may not have anything to actually collect money from for that. Because, again, if it's an intentional type situation, there's not going to be insurance involved. So those are really difficult claims to make. But again, you got to remember that the key difference between being covered under work comp and getting those benefits that you're entitled to, and then pursuing a third party claim against somebody, is the idea of recovering just more than medical bills and lost wages. You're then looking at the non-economic damages that, again, we commonly refer to in air quotes, pain and suffering. And it's having to have gone through the whole experience, having to deal with the injury, the limitations that it put upon somebody's life, and going through the pain and all the things that flowed from that injury. So that's the critical difference there. Now, another thing to keep in mind is if work comp pays benefits and you're making a third party claim, there's a very high likelihood that the work comp insurance company will have a reimbursement interest in any recovery the first responder gets from the third party claim. Under Missouri law, for example, a work comp insurance company has a legal right, if the injured worker obtains money from a third party, to get some kind of amount of money back for what they paid in the work comp claim. So again, it can get complicated, and it really takes a lawyer that knows this whole scenario to make sure that when settlements are happening, things are done properly so that something doesn't come back down the road and show up once people think it's all over, done, and there's no further action to be had. And actually there was. And the other part is really knowing what exactly a work comp insurance company is entitled to get out of a settlement, because you may end up overpaying the work comp insurance company when there were mechanisms in place to reduce how much they get back. And we've had that situation. We've had people reach out to us where they had an offer on the third party claim. They have a work comp insurance company that's in the mix saying, we want all this money back. And essentially, based on the money that's available in the third party claim, the person injured wouldn't be getting anything if they were paying back everything to the work comp carrier. And getting us involved, then we're able to work through the ways that we can limit what the work comp carrier actually gets out of a settlement. Things to think about in all of this, right? Again, why it's so important, if there is a potential third party claim to make, there's so much more that goes into an injury than just the physical damage. Again, a serious injury like that can cause a family disruption, can cause financial stress, can cause long-term disability that might not be adequately compensated for in the work comp system. And obviously, a psychological toll goes with a lot of these types of injuries. So these systems exist because injuries don't end when the shift does. There's got to be in place the mechanisms to make sure somebody is fully compensated when they sustain an injury on the job that may have a lifelong effect. So, as with any type of situation that I talk about, key steps if you're injured as a first responder on the job, you've got to report your injuries early to your employer. Very crucial because there are important timelines in place. You need to document everything, make sure there's a good paper trail, and just don't assume that workers' comp is all that is available to you. Again, we see it so many times where there is a third party potential claim out there that can provide much better compensation to the injured person than just the work comp system alone. And as always, I recommend you always get guidance from a personal injury lawyer that has seen this, done this, been there. They know the ins and outs of how these two claims intersect so that you don't end up shorting yourself significant compensation and critical compensation, very possibly, if you're left in a situation where you can no longer perform your duties as a first responder. That this can be a very life-changing event, and it's just really important that you have a professional involved that can make sure all the T's are crossed, all the I's are dotted. One thing that I want to make sure people take away from this podcast is some of the important laws that are in place to help protect our first responders. Number one, every driver on the roadway should know about the move over laws. Now, whether it's a tow truck driver, a police officer, somebody that is stopped on the side of the road in their official capacity, trying to help somebody or on a traffic stop or whatever that looks like, it's the obligation of us civilians, drivers, to move over if we can or slow down so that we don't present an extra hazard to these professionals that are on the side of the road doing their job. There's a public responsibility here to try to do what we can to protect these first responders. And I can't express enough my appreciation to all the first responders that go out every day. They encounter very dangerous situations, things that I know personally I have no interest in being exposed to. And so I just want to put it out there that we all need to be mindful of these folks. And again, whether it's police officers, firefighters, paramedics, whatever that looks like, we need to be thinking about their safety. We need to do everything we can not to increase danger to them. And we need to make sure that if they're hurt, they're getting the compensation that they're entitled to under the law. Because again, I see a lot of life changing injuries and career ending injuries. And we just have to make sure that these folks are fully aware of everything that's available to them so they don't end up maybe out of this career with no way to just quickly transition to something else. And now all of a sudden, their family is in distress, their financial situation is in distress. It's a terrible thought that they're going to add to what they've already been through just because they don't fully understand what they might be able to get through the various legal avenues that are available to them. As always, I hope you have found this podcast useful and helpful. And again, just as you go out on the roadways, you go about your daily business, please be mindful of the folks that are out there to help us. And until the next episode, please be safe and be well.